Thank you all for joining. Midweek session on biodiversity. Hopefully, we'll all get the information that we want. But from my part, thank you very much for Lorraine and Siobhan for being here, for talking and picking up this important conversation on biodiversity. To give you some background before introductions for everybody, I'm Lorenzo Corci, the co-founder and chief commercial officer at Earthly. I'll give you a bit of a background on Earthly as some of you may know our work, but we've started working in the nature markets over 6 years ago. Our ambition is to support leading projects across carbon, biodiversity, and importantly, the people impact. Our plans have continued to be true to our very first day, trying to find the highest integrity projects across the carbon and nature markets in general. We've built a team of researchers, engineers to deliver on that promise, really looking to support projects around the world. When we looked at the markets, especially in the UK, we found that there was a huge lack of opportunities, especially around biodiversity. And that was a real key element for us as we saw what was happening in the wider markets and on the macro space in terms of 30 by 30 and government drives to fundamentally turn back the loss of biodiversity that we is critical. We thought we could really try and support in our own way to boost voluntary biodiversity for the corporate world. In the UK, we have the fortune of having a BNG biodiversity net gain system. And at Earthly, our focus has always been on trying to find the most trusted and transparent systems to do our work. And having the government approved seal of approval on what biodiversity net gain was a critical step. And so being able to look at those systems and look at, in particular, the 30-year tenure that a conservation covenant or Section 106 provides is really important to give the land the time and the security to restore it. And so what we did was look at that model, validate it in terms of its ability to deliver on biodiversity, and then set a lens that Sharan will go on to a little bit later, but basically fractionalize what is a BNG unit, validated it for its quality, and then offered that to the voluntary market, to corporates and individuals that want to have a biodiversity impact. And I think the clarity there is also taking a lot from what we learned of the carbon market. It was that we needed to have quality at the heart of what we do, transparency, and an assurance also on claims being made and double counting. So we've built, which you will find on our website, and we can share this later, an actual registry to ensure that every single biodiversity credit that is purchased is visible and accounted for. So, really trying to build up and learn from some of the pitfalls from the carbon market to try to support biodiversity at scale. But that's a little bit of a background on me. I'd love to introduce our other important speakers. So Siobhan, I'll start with you. If you can give a quick intro on yourself and Natcap, and we'll go from there.
No, that sounds great. Fantastic. Well, it's great to be here. I'm the head of delivery at Natcap, and we're a nature intelligence provider to corporates and financial institutions. And we were spun out of Oxford University in 2018, and maybe we can skip to the next slide. And since then, we've really been working with our customers to provide them with science-backed data and methods, the right advisory support on top of that, and a platform to increasingly automate that process. And really what we're helping them to do is, as you can see on the slide here, really understand the corporate's interaction with nature and translate that to what it means for them. So where are they impacting nature? Where are they dependent on it, both across sites and supply chains? And then actually, how does that confer potentially financial risks? And what are the things that they should do to mitigate those risks and or capture opportunity? And so we're working across the gamut of things. Basically, how does nature interact with businesses and what should they be doing about it?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, amazing. And Lorraine, we're obviously partners and the amazing work that you're doing at Nattergal. But yeah, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Yeah. So I looked after Boothby Wildland, which is this amazing land transformation that we're going to focus on today. First site for Nattergal. Nattergal is a leading nature restoration company born out of the exemplar of Net Wildland, which I'm sure most people have heard of. And still with very strong ties with Sir Charlie Burrell being a founder and head of our chair of our board. And we're essentially a rapidly growing team of nature and sort of business and finance experts, which I think really well positions us in our mission to drive investment into nature. How we do that, I guess we'll explore a little bit more today, but it's all about building these bespoke blended finance plans that are really specific to our wildlands. First, really understanding the land, working really collaboratively, and then finding the appropriate finance mechanisms to support that ambitious nature recovery plan. And natural capital is clearly a significant part of a lot of those blended finance plans. And I think it's fair to say that the voluntary biodiversity credit has been a really tough nut to crack right from the beginning, as we were exploring all the different options for Boothby over the last 4 years. But yeah, just to say that it's really exciting to be here, having worked with the team over the last year to create these voluntary biodiversity credits available at Boothby Wildland. I think it's really novel, but also the process has been really robust. And I think it's really exciting to have this much more sort of accessible way in which people can contribute to the likes of Boothby Wildland.
Super, thank you so much. And Sharon, last but not least, I'll get to your slides, and please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So I'm Sharon. I'm the research lead at Earthly, and essentially I oversee our portfolio of high quality nature-based solutions. And really what I want to introduce right now very quickly is our Keystone 3 assessment, which sits behind all of these project assessments that we do. So I think I can very quickly start with something that sounds quite obvious, but I think it's worth saying out loud, that assessing projects well is hard. Assessing nature-based projects well is genuinely hard. They're complex living systems that operate in contested landscapes with communities, ecologies, carbon dynamics, all kind of interacting with each other. Our due diligence framework, Keystone 3, is designed to kind of be holistic because nature projects are very rarely ever strong or weak in one simple way. So a project might have a compelling carbon case, but a weaker community safeguards. So this is exactly what we try to address through our Keystone framework, and that's exactly what that spider diagram that y'all are seeing on your screens is helping to show. So Keystone maps all projects that we assess across 3 pillars: carbon, biodiversity, and people, and then breaks those down into areas like additionality, permanence, ecosystem benefits, stakeholder engagement, equity, and human rights. So rather than just giving buyers a headline score, it kind of shows the shape of the project, where it's strongest, where there are gaps, and where they might need to ask more questions. So we've reviewed over 1,000 nature projects, and finally less than 9 have passed our minimum requirement. Our aim finally is not volume, but it is in fact to identify projects where the evidence, the design, and the long-term delivery case are strong enough for our buyers. So yeah, I think that's all. That's the frame. And back over to you, Lorenzo.
Thank you. So I guess to start, Lorraine, I'd love for you to take us to Boothby. Let's let the land sort of speak for itself. I'd love to know a little bit of the background of the land use there, what was happening, and how 600 hectares of habitat mosaic creation actually looks like in practice.
Sure. If we could just get back to those slides, I put a few slides together just because I think it's really helpful just to have these kind of visuals. Yeah, 600 hectares. The one before, actually, if you just click one back, it shows essentially how we bought Boothby. As you say, 600 hectares, intensive arable land, purchased back in the latter end of 2021. And this area is known as the breadbasket of Britain. It's got some really high productive arable land. The Boothby landholding itself is grade 3. It's really variable soils with lots of lovely heavy clay, just like Nep. And these are essentially, if you zoom out from this aerial, this is what you get. You get the same in this landscape. And these are huge fields. Boothby was 92%, as you can see from the red outline there. We've got a little bit of Forestry England plantation and woodland in the heart of Boothby, which is a great seed source. But Boothby itself was 92% intensive arable on a sort of traditional 3-crop rotation. But that food wasn't going to human consumption. It was mostly going to fodder crops, essentially, because it just wasn't high enough quality. So over the last 5 years almost, we've staggered back from farming in the first 3 years, taking a little bit of each of the fields at a time to give that variability within the fields. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey, which we've now finished harvesting. So last harvest in September 2024. And as you can see from the snippet there of our vision statement, the local community has always been a real, really at the heart of what we're doing at Boothby, and we'll come on to it a little bit later in terms of what that means in terms of the scoring mechanism of the 3 pillars in the Keystone assessment. If we just click on to our vision statement, please, that we were just on, or vision idea, I guess. No, sorry. Yeah, you were on it. Yeah. So this is obviously nature leads the way. So who knows what will happen, but we can learn from projects like NEP, which we're so associated with. And this gives you an idea of what happens at landscape scale when we begin to reinstate those natural processes and essentially work with nature. I'll just point out the field at the bottom because we'll come on to it a little bit later probably. It's that's our control field. It's a really important counterfactual where we're repeating the monitoring we're doing across the rest of the site in that field as well. It's being farmed by a neighbouring farmer, so continuing in arable. But what we can see here in terms of this vision is the blurred edges of the bits of woodland we did have. We had a little bit of woodland for pheasant cover, essentially, and that Hart Inglesby Wood, that pause site. So you can see these becoming really rich, scrubby ecotones where you're not quite sure whether you're in woodland or in the field because it's all blurring the boundaries, areas that we know are really, really valuable for wildlife. We've been doing a lot of ecological kickstarters across the last few years. We had a handful of ponds on the site. We've really looked at the condition of those and worked to improve the condition of them. But we've essentially gone from a handful of ponds to over 30, including lots of ephemeral ponds. So 17 new ponds, I think we've got at the moment, and lots of ephemeral ones that have been created through our amazing rough and loose work, which is essentially where we've identified areas of limestone. And we've actually dug down to create a kind of moonscape, if you like, to get those microclimates in and bring that limestone up to the top, which is holding water sometimes, but also really important in terms of what happens with the floristic diversity on those rough and loose areas. Other kickstarters include bringing brash piles into the middle of fields, just areas where birds can rest and nest and bring those seed sources from the outer edges into the fields. We've been breaking lots of land drains, which is really, really important. If we can just click onto the next slide, we'll see why. This is our river, the West Glen River, that runs, really lucky to own both sides of the river in terms of the restoration, but it runs 2 kilometres from the north right to the south of Boothby, of the land holding, and this is it actually leaving the site. So essentially it hits a little meander there. You can kind of see the river channel there in the tree line, and then it floods where it hits the culvert of the road. So it was really important that we were doing some work, some pretty significant work on this river for both the flood alleviation and of course where we can hold water on the site, really important for nature. So this actually, you can't see it, but just to the right of here is a village called Lower Bitchfield, and in the winters of 2023 and 2024, that village was completely marooned, as you can see here from the hedge line where that's actually a road, believe it or not, under that flood water, that people couldn't leave their village essentially over 10 times each winter. So the river work was really, really important to us. And if we just click to the next one, this image is different part of the river because I wanted to show you some of the stage 0 work that we've done. And it was just taken last year, so it's all vegetated up. So this work was done last May, but we've done a couple of sections of stage 0 before bringing in the beavers behind me. So we've got a family of beavers brought in earlier this spring to continue that work, restoring the river. Essentially, it was a river that was so flashy in the winter, so many flood events, but in the summer it had actually previously completely dried up. It wasn't really a functioning river. It was essentially a large drainage ditch with all of these land drains, the idea being to get the water off the land to be able to farm it before. But we want to hold that water on the site. All of the vegetating sort of fields surrounding the smashing of the land drains, the rewiggling of the river this lovely braiding, lots of edge for nature. It's all holding that water on the site. So yeah, really pleased that in the last winter, after doing this work, that road only flooded 1 inch, and most of that was from a nearby ditch that we need to do some remedial work on that comes into that same culvert. So the water transformation has really created amazing wildlife habitat, which I can go into. But this aerial photo was actually taken a month ago at our Nature Day, when we had over 200 local people visit the site to do lots of free tours and activities. So essentially, it's gone from 92% monoculture, intensive arable, to this amazing mosaic of scrub, wood pasture, closed canopy woodland, ponds, and the wetlands being created by our ecosystem engineers as well. The next step is to bring in some large grazing animals, so pigs, later this year, to really keep driving that dynamism. We know that these mosaics are incredibly valuable for wildlife, but where we can kind of keep that moving like a kaleidoscope, that will really continue to drive the nature recovery at Boothby.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. And I think that variety of the work that you're doing, and, building in these, obviously sustainable models also through ecotourism, are incredible. And I think it really sets the scene to sort of biodiversity. Yes, there's a BNG behind that, but so much more being done. And I think that's really like a fundamental of, what good looks like. And yeah, I think we've looked at a lot of projects, and Sharan, maybe you can touch on it. I think over all of our projects that we've screened, over 1,000 projects, only about a small percentage pass through, and it'd be great maybe if you can walk us through that. I know that obviously Nattergal and the Boothby project went through the system, but why is it that projects don't pass? What is can we make any clear assumptions around the flaws maybe?
Of course, yes. Can we just also, maybe before I get into the specific Boothby scoring, can we just go also to my slides where I can maybe just introduce the Keystone? Yes, this one. So yeah, I've introduced Keystone already. It's the framework that sits behind all the projects that we onboard and work with. It covers 168 indicators, and it's applied across different standards, registries, methodologies, and project types. So, this example score at the top right of your screen shows the breakdown that we offer. And eventually what it is a buyer sees is that they're not just seeing high quality. They can see where projects are strongest and where relative risks or questions may sit. Another, I think, important aspect for everyone to know before going into the Boothby specific scoring is that scoring matrix that sits below the scoring above. Which shows another important feature. So Keystone scores both maturity and confidence. Maturity asks how strong project design is, while confidence asks how strong the evidence is behind that design. So a project can have an ambitious plan, but if the evidence is weak, the score should reflect that. And essentially then what Keystone is doing for buyers is it's turning this complex nature project into a decision ready evidence pack of sorts. So there's a clear score, there's a breakdown of strengths and risks, and there's this traceable link back to the evidence behind each judgment that they make. Then maybe just very quickly also going into our own, the earthly VBCs, which is what we've developed with Nattergal. So our VBCs represent a 9-meter squared area within a biodiversity restoration project. It gives businesses, a way to directly support measurable nature recovery through a very specific and mapped out portion of a real restoration site. Now, I think coming to your question, Lorenzo, of where projects often struggle in Keystone, because over 90%, like I said earlier, over 90% of projects that we assess don't pass Keystone. And where projects often struggle in Keystone is generally not because they don't have conservation or restoration value. It's actually because the evidence base is not strong enough to support the claim that a buyer would then later want to make. So the common issues are mostly structural. So baselines are too generic, or they're or they're proxy based rather than site specific. Additionality is often very unclear because the intervention may have already happened through grants or regulations or common practice. Permanence may, rely solely on good intentions rather than legal or governance mechanisms. We see that MRV can be too narrow to detect any meaningful change. And sometimes these claims move very quickly from, we are financing nature recovery to we are offsetting our impacts without any evidence base at all to support that. So Boothby stood out to us because it performed strongly across this entire integrity assessment that we did, and not just one part of it. So its overall Keystone score of 8.2 shows strong consistency across the three main pillars. So carbon at 8.3, biodiversity at 8.1, and people at 8.0. So this kind of consistency that we saw, it matters because then we're not just looking for a project that performs well within one dimension while it's, carrying maybe hidden risks or unmanaged risks somewhere else. Within the biodiversity pillar specifically, Boothby scored the highest on MRV at 8.7. And that is the standout strength that we saw. It reflects the depth of the evidence and the monitoring design that was already in place in the project. And of course, Lorian will be able to tell you more about this, but when we were assessing, we saw that Boothby uses multi-method MRV, including UK HAB surveys, bird transects, eDNA, sampling, bioacoustic surveys, drone LiDAR, and I believe over 1,100 soil cores just for the carbon baseline alone. So that gave us a much stronger basis for tracking ecological and then carbon outcomes that a project should rely on, rather than a project that relies on just a narrow metric or a single survey method. So then this gave us the confidence in this project because the evidence base is very strong and the restoration pathway, then we see it's credible. And then, of course, the monitoring architecture is already in place to detect any changes that emerge as they happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so critical, and I guess from a Nattergal point of view, that being able to prove everything was so critical. And I think when we speak to clients, it's like, how do you validate that? What's the proof? And I think a lot of the businesses we're speaking to are looking at TNFD, and that's a great thing, putting nature calculation at the heart of what they do. And I guess Siobhan at Natcap, I guess that's something that you're looking at. You're really speaking to clients, and I guess you're seeing maybe a gap maybe between assessing nature related risks and dependency on acting on them. What do you hear from those clients and what they want, but also where do you see biodiversity credits fitting in? It's a very topical right now, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think where corporates are starting, I mean, it might even be better to move backwards, which is we've seen a real shift. So corporates were starting to think about how to bring nature into climate assessments and really just starting with that impact and dependency piece. And now I think we've seen a real shift from not just impacts and dependencies to actually what does this mean for my business and how does nature related risk actually confer resilience implications for me. So really that's where they're starting. It's with that risk framing and starting to understand, okay, as an example, I have direct operations that might release pollutants into a watercourse. In some geographies, that's going to potentially lead to increasing regulatory risk. So what do I need to do in order to mitigate it? Likewise, for their supply chains, if you're procuring particular commodities, rice, other from water-stressed regions, that's an availability risk, that's a price volatility risk. And so really it's that translation piece that a lot of corporates are working on. But in terms of why that doesn't always translate to action, I think there's a number of things that concretely stand in the way or often stand in the way. And part of that is really not believing the data and the method. So similarly to what Sharan was speaking about in terms of actually making sure the evidence cases are strong, we see that really consistently in the other side of the picture, which is actually just assessing where the risk is. people don't believe the data and the method where they're in a black box and where it doesn't speak to the business. The business might have mitigations in place or they might have long-term contracts in place. So you've got to both really understand not just where is the data coming from, what does it mean, but actually how does it matter to my business context? And then I think the big part as well is that lack of proof points. So the actual feasible next steps, the solutions. What can we do? Has anybody actually done this? And where are the proof points of success? And I really think that's where some of the voluntary biodiversity carbon credit work comes in. It's examples of areas where people have implemented solutions for positive outcomes and showing where those outcomes have yielded results. And so the more proof points there are, the easier this becomes. And yeah, I think that's the really important part of the puzzle.
Yeah, and I guess, I think we see that a lot of businesses that are connected to food and systems that obviously take from the land are obviously the first to look at the risks. Like, do you see in your world other businesses, tech companies, or what level do you think we really are when it comes to looking across businesses? Because for many, it's essential. It's your supply chain. It's your future. It's your future revenue. Where are we at the stage of sort of looking at others that maybe don't see their business completely connected to what they do?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think it's both where we're thinking about transition risk and then physical risk. So when we're thinking about companies which might not necessarily be dependent on agricultural commodities and then less exposed to physical risk, they might be impacting the environment. And data centers is a good example there, both in the construction, the potential water abstraction for particular cooling technologies. Those potentially confer transition related risks as we're starting to move towards what should sustainable operating systems look like. So I think that's where businesses are, is they're really trying to work out, where is nature material to my business? Is it in my direct operations, and how does it actually impact me? Or is it in my supply chain? And both of those pieces require very different work with very different teams. So I think there's always two parts to it, one of which is understanding where we're at. And then the other part of it is sustainability teams are often not accountable for changing the action of the business. So they might have the answers to, okay, we think there's risk embedded in our supply chain, or we think there's risk embedded in our direct operations. But now I need to go and engage with those teams, convince those teams, and make a business case for action. And I think that's where we see a lot of the work is taking place now.
Yeah. And I think from what I see is that there's biodiversity is complex. It's different in every different country. And what I see often at the corporate level is sort of a willingness to jump to something that's understood. So water is a clear example of that. People are really narrowing in on water, and projects that can really account for, validate water change are probably ones that can really connect at the corporate level. But I think it's our job sometimes, with obviously things that we're doing with Keystone, and obviously looking at the work that Nattergal does, to start to raise up some of these other factors, whether that's species, how is, a species like a beaver really helping that ecosystem? How do we connect that to the town and the floods? Like, I think it's bringing out these sort of data points through validation, but also trying to broaden the understanding of it was a quite wide word, which is biodiversity. And I guess that sort of, Shiran, I guess when looking at what we offer, like what do you think is the key elements that we can share back with corporates that really enable them to sort of evidence what's actually a carbon credit is, and a biodiversity credit is, and what they're going to receive, and what they've done with that?
Yeah, I think often when a purchase of this sort is being made, a lot of times buyers are looking at what they receive. And I think the useful question in this case is just not what certificate they receive, but for us is what evidence we can provide to kind of defend the purchase. So like I said earlier, we provide this kind of evidence package, which has two layers. So one is this earthly integrity layer. So the credit record, the Keystone assessment, a ledger entry, claim guidance, some reporting format. And then there's the project evidence layer, which draws on the monitoring data, the documentation from the developer. And the point is that then the buyer receives this one joined up evidence trail from Earthly, rather than just having to kind of piece it piece together all of these separate materials themselves. So at the point of purchase, a buyer receives transaction level information. So what they bought, where it's located, which project it is linked to, what the unit basis is, any claim boundary, and the safeguards, any safeguards against double counting. For earthly VBCs, that of course includes the project location, it includes the unique ledger record, and this mapping layer that connects the credit to a real place. This biodiversity, this transparent biodiversity ledger is very important because it gives our buyers and our stakeholders this traceable record of the credit issuance and then the ownership and retirement, rather than just leaving that information in a private spreadsheet or a one-off purchase document. And it helps with the transparency and the traceability and this double counting risk. And that's of course just one part of what we provide. They also then receive the Keystone evidence pack, which is the project assessment, the scorecard, the rationale behind the scoring, and a summary of sorts of all of the evidence that we review. So baseline surveys, the monitoring data management plans, everything that I've been speaking about. I think then the key point for just any team or any sustainability teams becomes that what we're providing is not just us saying that the project is good. We're showing how we reached that view and how strong the evidence behind it is. The last layer that we're able to provide is kind of disclosure-ready reporting. So it translates the project evidence into something that buyers can actually use. So what outcome was funded, which evidence supports it, where it sits in the larger, company's nature strategy, and how it relates to this value chain relevance or double materiality, what can be claimed, what should not be claimed. And then the last bit, I think ongoing, I touched on this a little bit already. The buyer receives updates from Earthly as the project matures. So as we receive new monitoring updates or we receive updates on habitat condition or any biodiversity indicators, we provide those updates to the buyer. And also if for some reason there is a reassessment that is needed when evidence changes, Keystone is designed to remain live rather than just be frozen at the point of sale. So yeah, I think long story, very long. I would frame this as as an audit trail of sorts. Every claim that we kind of help with is traceable back to a source. So the ledger entry, the credit location, methodology, baseline, all of it. And we also give the next update point.
It sounds like a lot of work, but I think also, I guess, from Lorraine, from a point of view of the developer, you have so many choices to make, don't you? Like on MRV, on what data to capture. I think we're almost awash with data, but I think we're doing that because we're trying to really demonstrate the validity, the trust, the work that's been going on. And obviously there's when it comes to, I've got sort of multiple questions when it comes to sort of that 30-year management commitment. Like, how do you look at, from your perspective, to operationally guarantee that long-term outcome? It's a lot of time. You might have changing employees and stuff and on top of that, how did you maybe go into selecting which MRV was going to be important to you? Because we're at the very beginning of this market. Like, how, what decisions did you make to ensure that I'd love to know more about that.
Yeah, sure. And so in terms of the 30-year management commitment, that's a legal requirement, I guess, as you said at the beginning, being based on the BNG. Protected by Section 106 and conservation covenants that we've already got, because we have units for sale, a wide variety of units for sale for BNG, and this voluntary credit being sort of fractionalized version means that they're all protected under those same sort of legal obligations. And I think in terms of that's really robust as a system. I think it's one of the strengths of the earthly credits that this voluntary biodiversity credit is based on a statutory market mechanism. We know that that's been used, for example, through landscape recovery projects, reporting to DEFRA. I mean, it's well known, it's got standardized like measurements, it's got these legal safeguards, and it's ongoing monitoring as well. So yeah, really robust in terms of that, but we've also got a lot of complementary data that are available. As Sharan was saying, there's also a sort of project development layer which we can go on to talk about in terms of the more species records, which add a lot of life, I guess, and storytelling as well. And it's tricky in terms of delivering the outcomes. We're natural process led, which does have some challenges. We can use mechanisms like buffering so that we're not sort of over promising, to ensure that we're not we're allowing those natural processes to happen, I guess I'd say, but not over promising and delivering ultimately. But these natural processes are really critical for that landscape scale, like climate resilience. So that also, it's almost by the nature of what we're doing is increasing the resilience of the outputs as well, if you like. In terms of how we came to all those decisions, it's been a long process. We have, really robust baseline at Boothby, a couple of years, and we trialed a lot of different mechanisms, particularly for the voluntary credit market. And I guess they're really complementary because we've also got BNG and we've got carbon and we've got landscape recovery reporting. It was really a test and trial process. And from the work that we did at Boothby, we've really refined that and looked at what we now do on our other sites. Obviously, they're always locally, context specific with the different habitats, but we've got this really good suite. And it's a lot. It is a lot, but I think that's really important in terms of all of the monitoring and the reporting, which is obviously why we've got this really good score with the earthly pillars. But actually, it's really important for us because critical to this is adaptive management. So we want to be evidence-backed. We want to be evidence-led. So we're informing how we're managing. We may be natural process-led, but that's not hands-off by any means. It means that we are watching, we are evaluating, we are tweaking what we are doing as we go forward. So yeah, and as you said, all of this reporting, I think from a corporate point of view, fitting into the likes of TNFD, those kind of annual reporting mechanisms, I think adds a lot of value, and being sort of underpinned by these really reliable structures, I think means that we've got something that's really robust as a process to go through, but also really accessible. There's not many ways in which both individuals and corporates, if they want to sort of dip their toe, if you like, can contribute to a landscape scale nature recovery project with such ambition. So at £180 a credit, it's really accessible, which is really important in terms of moving this element of the natural capital market forward.
Yeah, and I think when you say that, I can't help but think how lucky we are in the sense that the government stepped out of the way, and really stepped in the front. There's not many countries that have led like that, and that obviously gave you an understanding, your financial backers, to be able to look at a compliance market and look to invest for that. And now what you have is that robust system led by a government, which a voluntary system can now step into and give the confidence. And I think we've not, I guess, being able to have that backing, but also be like cognizant of that. A lot of this wouldn't have been possible without that. But there's also obviously things that we could do on top of that. But yeah, I'm always like, sometimes we should take it a bit for granted, which I think is something that I think being in the UK is an important step to look at. But I think, I guess, Siobhan, from your side, that element of permanence is a critical step. And I think when we're looking at speaking with corporates, you have obviously the need to stand up, claims, to understand purchase choices, and what we see often is sort of, is it carbon and biodiversity? Is it carbon with biodiversity? There's sort of this tension between what is the real outcome, or what businesses should do. And I'd love to sort of hear from you, what you see happening today, and also from a perspective of sort of a sustainability leader, what kind of conversations really are helping, them when it comes to that CFO conversation? This is money we need to spend, and this is why, and it's defensible. Yeah, it's a big one.
It absolutely is. I mean, I guess carbon historically has led the way, and there it's very much about making sure that you have that evidence base, so that you can guarantee claims, and that's where the likes of Keystone come in to make sure that that's verifiable, and you can come to the board with that evidence backing. And then when it comes to sort of the biodiversity first or the nature first side of things, I think it's an emerging space. And I think we can see a few different things that might happen, but a lot of companies are thinking relatively creatively at this at the moment. And so some examples that we might be seeing is voluntary credits as a financing mechanism for mitigating nature risk. We know nature-based solutions have lots of examples where they can support positive outcomes. We've mentioned water a few times, but the water industry is heavily involved in some nature-based solutions to improve water quality. We know that financing is always a barrier to those things. So biodiversity credits can help monetize the biodiversity component of value created, and that's something that can really start to make things move. Likewise, I think we're starting to talk to corporates that are really thinking about landscape scale approaches, particularly with supply chains in the UK and in Ireland. And so can biodiversity credits help several buyers support a shared nature-based solution project? Again, that's something creatively that people are starting to see if it's possible. And then I think the final one, which again speaks to making sure that you have that evidence base that you can track over time, will be how does this play into corporates' transition plans? And the TNFD is thinking about how to bring voluntary carbon biodiversity credits into the guidance. It's emerging, essentially. So we are slightly waiting for their steer. We know it will be placed within some sort of mitigation hierarchy framework, as biodiversity is so place-based, but that will come. And when it does come, and when corporates have that clarity, then I think we'll see more action on this as well.
And I think sometimes that mitigation hierarchy is really critical and important. But there's sometimes, as from long supply chains, things that are outside of your control, or an investment cycle because the depreciation on the asset isn't there yet. But that does mean, like, what can I do today? And I think that's one of the things we really drive for when we're speaking to clients, is like taking responsibility now, because we can't just wait to 2050 and hope for the best during that period. Yes, reductions are essential, but nature does take a little bit longer, and especially a little longer than maybe investment cycles. So it's just starting, bedding it in with the teams, understanding it, and learning, because in the end it's going to be new for so many people across teams, right? But carbon seems to be at the top table, C-suite, they get it, they know it, and they're planning, right? Biodiversity is almost the secondary thing, but also critical for some in certain spaces. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how that, especially on the TNFD side, plays out. But when it comes to validation, and I guess Lorraine, I was so interested in the MRV choices that you've made, but and I love sort of geeking out at all the different things that there is available out there. But I'd love to know, trust being a fundamental pillar here, what the monitoring, what the reporting and verification approach that you've taken, but also what the early findings are, because you've been doing this for a bit. The plan is big. Like, how are you mapping this? What's been happening? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, sure. My favorite bit, talking about the impact. I guess talking about the monitoring that we do first. As Sharan was saying earlier, there's this sort of additional, on top of the UK hub-based BMG kind of underpinning habitat approach, we've got a whole suite of different biodiversity metrics, and actually ecosystem service metrics, and social metrics as well, from the work we're doing with the local community. Just sticking on the biodiversity, as Sharan said, LiDAR, bioacoustics. We've got 21 sensors that go out across the site for a month in May, and then again later in the year recording bats and birds. Traditional ecological surveys, as well as eDNA. So you've got your CBCs and your BBSs, all of these very standardized ways of monitoring bird populations and abundances, and butterflies and bees. So for those, we've kind of gone with the standard ones that are sort of reportable, that people know, and you know, there's a lot of work being put into doing those. And I think it's really the combination of these that adds a lot, because if you get a load of ecologists, myself included, in a room, we'll all argue about how to measure something and what kind of creates this kind of basket of metrics, if you like. So we've got a broad amount of biodiversity, as well as those ecosystem and social metrics. But I think really important to all of this is also that control field that I pointed out at the first. So we'll continue monitoring in that control field as that counterfactual, as we do across the rest of the wildland as it evolves. And that, I guess, gives us a kind of status quo of what Boothby would be like had it remained in 92% intensive arable, which is really, really important. And then we're really keen on collaboration. So we do a lot of work with universities and external researchers. So there's all of that wealth of data coming through as well, with different sort of niche subjects. We've supported a handful of PhDs live at the moment at Boothby, and well over a dozen sort of undergrad and master's level projects, some of those continuing each year. So we actually are tracking the same thing over time, which is obviously really important. And we're partnering with the likes of Forest Research. So we're one of 4, and our other site in Essex is another one of these 4 big, large scale, sort of looking at natural colonisation, 30 years of monitoring with Forest Research, the LEARN project, the large scale ecosystem recovery network. So there's a wealth of sort of ability to come and collect additional data through Boothby, as well as our kind of core, if you like. And that's really important. But we're also working on the kind of, I guess, the joy and the wonder that comes out of the sites, which I think is really important. You've got to win hearts as well as minds, I think. So you can't always put a statistic on everything. We've got some great statistics on our volunteering. I think it's over 3,500 hours in the first few years that the volunteers have come through the weekly sort of volunteering, and even more now that the beavers are on site. But one of my favourite things is a story, I can post a link to it, of a young man called Finn, and he talks about his journey beginning to volunteer with Boothby and the impact on him. So we've got that kind of really powerful communication potential coming from everything that's happening as this land transforms, and nature and local people really rediscover it, I guess. We talked a lot about water, and I showed the river. So we've got the kind of standard metrics of river flow, river level, various different water qualities. That river was basically a very boring botanical baseline on it. It's really come back to life. So we're looking at the kind of things coming through. The standard things, you know, your average sort of water, we'd never saw herons or moorhens or even dragonflies on that river before. And I flushing up herons every time, little egrets, even more kind of the migrant birds that are coming in, things like teal. We've had little ringed plover, and the green sandpiper. So yeah, just these birds that are coming through that just, they wouldn't have come down. So we've got those kind of ad hoc records coming through as well. And that's the same across the rest of the site. We're seeing birds like whitethroats that were confined to the hedgerows coming out into the middle of the fields, grey partridge territories. We've had hen harriers come over. I could go on and on. There's so many. But yeah, we can really see that we're not just like attracting them, we're holding them. The vegetation structure, for example, for those hen harriers is actually keeping them for months on end, feeding across. We're just about to launch our impact report, actually. So all of this is really nicely summarised in our impact report, which we can send out to attendees. And yeah, I guess from our 2023 baseline to last year, we've seen over double the biodiversity in one way in which we kind of bundle these together. So yeah, amazing trajectory that will continue. But I guess I'd also say what's really special about this, and people interested in these voluntary credits through Earthly, is that it's tangible and it's local. You know, Boothby is an hour from King's Cross, it's in the Midlands. You can come and visit it. I think the favourite part of my job is taking people and corporates, whether it's an away day or corporate volunteering, out to that site and really feeling it, and learning about the site, learning about the transition, but experiencing it. This time of the year, it's absolutely humming with insects and awash with different colour. There's lots of these lovely colonising plants come through. So it's been, a really privilege to see that, be part of that transformation. And I guess that's what's special about these earthly credits. They're accessible, but also a really robust way in which people can tangibly contribute to this nature recovery at Boothby Wildland.
And I guess that's sort of an open question to Siobhan or yourself. Like, what we sometimes hear, and there's a few questions even here, is sort of like, when should a company start doing this? Why? What time in their cycle do they get involved with actually this positive impact? And what's the right quantity? I think that's the tension as well. It's like, oh, how much am I meant to buy? With carbon, I know my emissions. There's this sort of, people are at different stages. I don't know who wants to take that question, but what would you say to someone looking at this and when the right time or the right amount is to step in to this market?
Yesterday. I think the old adage goes that the best time to plant a tree was years ago. I think this is a really special part of Boothby Wildland if we're focusing on this as an earthly credit, because it's at the beginning of its journey. So being part of that journey, NEP is such an exemplar, but not many people got to see it in the early days. So from a sort of project developer point of view, I think I just see a lot of people really taking a lot from coming and seeing that. You can still see the sort of, where the arable fields were, and you can still see the river channel. And so being part of that journey from sort of a really personal point of view in terms of the impact, I guess, but I'll let Siobhan answer in terms of the more corporate.
The more corporate side of things. Yeah, look, I think for most corporates, it's always going to be about making sure you can evidence the why and then understand the outcome that you're trying to reach. So always you will have a sustainability team that is trying to build a business case for doing something. And that business case tends to have to be founded in, I would like to mitigate this risk, or I would like to potentially provide a positive contribution here for this reason. And so that's the evidence base that the sustainability team has to come with. And ultimately what the why is then directly related to the outcome that you want to reach. And it sounds like engaging directly with the likes of Nattergal, who can help also, I imagine, to structure that business case and to help provide some of the answers to the questions that these sustainability teams know that they're going to come up against, feels like a really positive thing to try and do as well.
And is there, there's two systems at play that we know in terms of nature accounting for nature risks, TNFD and SBTN. Do you see, one of them winning over the other? And for those that maybe don't have huge teams, you said like capture one nature dependency. Like, is there an easy way to do this? Is there free tools available? What would you say if someone just looking at this at the very start and trying to
it's a great question.
Title of this, how do you put nature on the balance sheet? How do you
Yeah, so I think most people will, so neither of them, you don't need to pick one or the other. They answer slightly different questions. So a lot of people will start with TNFD because it has a handy what should you do alongside it, which is essentially the LEAP framework. And so it works through, okay, locate where you operate, understand how you impact and depend on it, work out how that feeds through to risks, and then prepare. And that prepare stage is all about ambition and what should you do. And that's where SBTN feeds in, because it's about then the target setting. So essentially the SBTN framework will help you work through the process, and an SBTN target might be the outcome of that process, that actually we need to set a land footprint target. And within that, landscape engagement as part of the land footprint target that SBTN sets out might be about working with local partners to identify potential biodiversity credits such that you can evidence ecological and social indicators improving in material landscapes or important landscapes for your business. And there are lots of free tools out there. So TNFD and SBTN work with these tool providers to create ecosystems of where to go for what. Again, these tools are always about what are you trying to use it for. So WWF, Biodiversity Risk Filter, is free, available to use, as is Encore, as a plenty that are listed. And then when you want to go deeper, that's where you might potentially look to other providers who can support get deeper than the free tools can. But I'd say the free tools are a really good starting point to get to grips with hotspotting. And all of these will provide you with at least the first steps of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's essential to start to move on this, and time is of the essence. I guess from our perspective, when it comes to the biodiversity side, it is a sort of a very nascent world. There's lots of different crediting systems now happening internationally, whether that's species or conservation. I think one of the things here is that we've been given the, like I said earlier, this opportunity with biodiversity net gain at a government approved standard, which is a fundamental metric, which is tracked and transparent. And I think for businesses that really want to start to support biodiversity, this is almost the best system to be able to do that officially, and not sort of just see it maybe as philanthropy. This is really fundamental benefits that are tracked and delivered over a consistent 30-year time frame. And as you and businesses become more aware of climate risks or biodiversity risks impacting your supply chain, something I think we're all acutely aware of or see more happening, then it will become important to defend as a business one's position or understand how the long-term impact of biodiversity loss and nature loss will affect the bottom line. And I think we're seeing that, like I mentioned, tomatoes from Spain, if not being able to get your supplies, but this world is moving quickly, and we are seeing a lot of support from corporates finally, I think, really starting to account for that risk because of the risks. But I guess Lorraine and Siobhan, is there any final things you would like to add when saying, trying to find out, what businesses should be doing and putting nature on the balance sheet? Would you have anything else to add, even Sharan?
I think I'll echo Lorraine, which is start. So work with your teams, really identify, and if you can, prioritize where you think within your direct operations are your key impacts and dependencies, where you think within your supply chain your key impacts and dependencies, and start to translate that to risk. And then I think not just nature takes time, but within businesses, engaging the relevant teams takes time. And getting those teams on side and understanding what is important to those teams takes time. And so actually building that into your understanding of how you're going to make this move as a sustainability professional, it will be key to engage procurement. It will be key to engage site managers. And so work with those teams to get to your business case.
Yeah, and I guess picking up from that, from a project developer's sort of point of view, reach out to us. As I said, we can help in terms of, if it's earthly credits, then we've got all of this really robust, really accessible way in which we can, anyone, even individuals, some of the first that have been sold, the Boothby earthly credits, have been individuals wanting to contribute. So whether it's corporates or individuals, it all really adds up. And we can help with, all of that amazing reporting that hopefully we've highlighted. But as I said, we're just about to release our first impact report, which is great sort of material for some of those teams to really see. But I'd also say, come and visit us. We do host sort of corporate away days, and we can put on volunteering, or we can come and go and see the river. And I think some of the best sort of transformations I've seen from people who've arrived not really knowing what they're going to see to actually coming in and really feeling it is through that ability to come to site and tangibly see what you can contribute through an earthly voluntary credit.
Super. Sharan, anything from your side?
Yeah, no, I think very quickly, from the earthly perspective, of course, I'll say that please ask for evidence behind the claims that you make, because we're here, we're trying to bridge that gap, we can provide it. And yeah, I think we've spoken about it, but back over to you, Lorenzo.
Yeah, I think we could have kept going for another few hours, I think, but there's lots of questions we haven't been able to answer. We'll make sure to get back to every single question, specifically on email. And if there is others, please get in touch. I think, thank you very much, all of you for attending, and it's so great to see sort of so many people interested in this topic. I think from both an earthly or Nattergal, Natcap perspective, we've shared quite a lot of what we see in terms of this market, where it's going, the sort of the ability for us to really start to restore biodiversity and integrate it into business models, which will be an essential part, we feel, of really bringing forward and sustainable businesses as well. So thank you very much all for listening. We'll share the recordings, and thank you for joining us today. Thanks.